Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
We may do a little bit more live commentary on PMQs in the coming weeks and months, but I will only intervene if I've really got something that needs to be said or something that I feel qualifies as fact-checking. I'm not going to do it for the sake of it. Speaking of fact-checking, as ever, just double-check that my memory wasn't playing tricks upon me. Sir Martin Donnelly was the Permanent Secretary of the Department for International Trade until 2017, and it was he who told Business Insider earlier this week that countries are likely to offer the United Kingdom worse trade deals than it currently enjoys as a member of the European Union. The bloke what does it, describing what he thinks will happen. Theresa May, still standing up in Parliament and citing the, quotes, ability, end quotes, to negotiate our own trade deals as a positive or a reason for Brexit. So I said that thing, earlier, and you laughed. You may not have laughed. A bit rude. I said to you that the only Brexit that would actually properly reflect the last 3 years would be the Brexit that key Brexit supporters publicly described as worse than being in the European Union. And that, with the withdrawal agreement passes, with the support of people like Rees-Mogg and Johnson, that is what we're going to get. And there is Theresa May, publicly stating we're leaving because we'll be able to negotiate our own trade deals, after former Permanent Secretary in the department that negotiates trade deals has said, well, if we do that, the deals we negotiate will be worse than the ones we currently have. What do we want? Things to get worse. When do we want it? Now. They should have stuck that on the side of a bus. Speaking of Brexiters, Suella Braverman is one of the key players who covered herself in, I don't know quite what the word is, infamy during the campaign by dint of various interventions that displayed a level of ignorance remarkable even by the standards of her Brexit-supporting colleagues. And yesterday she caused something of a controversy again when she deployed the phrase cultural Marxism in an interview. The Board of Deputies of British Jews has said that she should clarify what she meant and pledge not to use the phrase again. I think we've been in touch with her this morning, hoping to give her a platform upon which she could clarify what she meant and or pledge not to use the phrase again. But I'm hand on heart, I'd see it used by sort of very, 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 very right-wing, usually anonymous internet types. I've never really seen it anywhere else, this phrase. Let me tell you what it means in my experience. What it means in my experience, it's a phrase used by racists to describe people who tell them not to be racist. So it's odd that Suella Braverman should be on the same page of the dictionary, at least, as they are. But I know nothing. Educate me. Verity's in Hove. Verity, what can you tell us?
Hi, James. How are you doing?
Very well indeed.
Okay, well, I've got quite a couple of points, really. I think one thing that we do need to do with this is establish the historical context.
Yes, please.
And then establish the modern context. And my own context, I guess, I'm currently writing a book about the rise of the alt-right and the far-right at the moment, which actually is one of the things that got me listening to your show a lot, really, because I want to understand sort of certain tendencies of the kind of people who, I guess, the kind of people who are phoning in to fight you a lot in the past.
A bit quiet now,
yeah,
but we are where we are. You can still find them on the Facebook page if you need research.
Yeah.
Carry on.
So, historically, the phrase originates in Nazi Germany. And it was the propaganda, it was a kind of lytotic sort of expression set up by the propaganda ministry. Actually, the expression then was cultural Bolshevism.
Okay.
And it was used to describe certain left-leaning academics, so the Frankfurt School particularly, people like Theodor Adorno, Max Horkheimer, sort of mostly Jewish intellectuals who were working in the field of cultural research, critical theory, and post-Marxist and Marxist thought. So those are the people they were aiming this thing at.
Right.
And it became a kind of conspiracy theory very quickly. They were
while the Nazis were in power or afterwards?
Well, in the rise to power, particularly.
Oh, I see. So it goes back further.
These people are conspiring to kind of bring down Germany, there's always been this idea that they were all sitting there agreeing with each other, which if you've read any of these people's books...
they obviously don't. I mean, like all academia, they were probably arguing over what biscuits to order.
Yeah, they're constantly, fiercely... I mean, Bertolt Brecht... And
if I was a Nazi propagandist, what would I mean in a nutshell when I described cultural Marxism and pretended that I believed they all agreed with each other, pretended they were all on the same page, punting the same project? What would the project be for the Nazi propagandist?
The project was undermining traditional values and culture, essentially. You know, because people like Adorno were writing about things like propaganda, ironically enough, and the way that it operates in culture. It was seen as a threat, and it kind of was a threat, I guess.
I'm going to make a suggestion to you, which is that Suella Braverman here is guilty more of being stupid than she is of being sinister. Because
absolutely.
Let me read you what she said. This is a speech, actually, not an interview, given to the Bruges Group. We are engaging in many battles right now. As conservatives, we are engaged in a battle against cultural Marxism, where banning things is becoming de rigueur, where freedom of speech is becoming a taboo, where our universities, quintessential institutions of liberalism, are being shrouded in censorship and a culture of no platforming. Absolute load of old rubbish. But she's not using the phrase cultural Marxism, I don't think, to describe what Goebbels would have used it for.
Well, that brings me on perfectly to the next point, which is kind of in the modern context, the way it's being used.
Yes.
Now, it has a re-emergence in kind of the late 90s, early 2000s, the term, with certain right-wing groups like the National Front and the BNP have used it quite a lot. If you watch some of the recent BNP youth videos.
Quite long words for the BNP.
But I think what's happened is there's been a sort of reawakening of the idea against kind of modern academics. So people often, most of the people, I mean, I saw the famous recent attack on the Bookmarks bookshop in London.
Yes.
And the person behind the camera is a man called...
No, I can't let you do that, Verity, just because I don't know. I'm sure you're not about to say things that are problematical, but I don't have the knowledge.
But in the video... this man is screaming about, people like Gramsci and Adorno and all this kind of thing, and I don't think even he quite knows what he means.
Someone's been on the internet looking for what they wanted to find. I mean, I have to remind you, somewhat uncomfortably, especially given that Suella Braverman said this yesterday, and the atrocity in Christchurch that saw 50 people murdered in mosques is still very fresh in the memory, is that the phrase was cited by both Anders Behring Breivik and the man who shot dead 50 people at mosques in Christchurch. Now, I don't know whether I'm being too generous to Suella Braverman, but I suspect she didn't realise that when she thought it would be a good phrase to put in a speech to hard-right conservatives.
I think it's becoming more acceptable and unquestioned on the right. I don't think, people don't really question the language that often. It's kind of a buzzword, and you have public-facing intellectuals like Jordan Peterson at the moment. He's writing about what he calls postmodern neo-Marxism,
right,
which is almost the same thing. And
when they talk, because I hear this phrase a lot, the assault upon Western values, or the attempt to extinguish Western values, what do they mean by Western values?
Well, exactly. I think
it's not a rhetorical question. I was hoping you would tell me.
The whole thing relies on a double-sided abstraction. So both the points in language are just completely. They set up assumptions in your head, but really, what are traditional Western values? Sure, they change all of the time.
What they really mean is too many foreign faces.
Thinkers like Karl Marx are Western thinkers. It's quintessentially Western philosophy. If they say that kind of thing is under attack, then why attack the very thing that you say you stand up for?
But if they play the freedom of speech line and they say you're not allowed to say what you want to say in this country anymore without X, Y, or Z happening, and then we say that she shouldn't use this phrase, is there a danger that we're sort of falling into a trap?
Well, only if you take that view on freedom of speech and what freedom of speech actually means.
Only if you believe that you should be allowed to shout fire in a crowded room, or indeed indulge in the kind of discrimination and racist scaremongering that leads from ugly places to even uglier places. Verity, what a cracking call. There's room for a couple more before Theo joins us to pick over the carcass of PMQs. Back to cultural Marxism in a moment, and the question of whether Suella Braverman was being stupid or sinister when she employed a phrase with roots deep in Nazi propaganda and anti-Semitism. I hand on heart, I'm not being glib or facetious. I lean towards stupid as opposed to sinister at the moment, but I'm open to persuasion. Just to cheer you up before Theo gets here, there's a little line in the Times this morning, and it tallies with something that Dan Snow has tweeted. Dan Snow, the historian, tweeted, "If I was the Queen, I'd be sweating. Who do you summon to form a government when neither party leader controls the confidence of the Commons?" Have a punt on someone else? Question mark. It's a fascinating observation. An awful lot of these people. What happens when the steering wheel of a car is grabbed by orangutans is that people who are brilliant at driving can't quite believe what they're seeing in front of them. And so it is with constitutional historians at the moment, listening to people like Andrew Bridgen essentially just sort of burp all over Parliament with epic weapons-grade ignorance. This is the Times this morning, written by people that know of what they speak. Buckingham Palace will be concerned at the prospect of a chaotic political breakdown dragging the Queen into politics. The palace are bricking it, said a political source. I love that phrase. I haven't heard it for years. Threats by Brexiteers, don't use that word on this programme ordinarily, but that is the copy in front of me, to bring down the government could involve the untested no-confidence procedures set out in the Fixed Terms Parliaments Act, another one of David Cameron's crowning glories. This could involve the Queen appointing a new Prime Minister. The Palace will wish to leave this choice to ministers and MPs in consultation with the new Cabinet Secretary, Mark Sedwill. However, there could be a situation where Mrs May declines to resign, a successor is chosen before it is proven that they can command a majority in the Commons, or there are two viable candidates from opposing parties could legitimately take over. The Palace will want to ensure that they are not the one that chooses between them. I'll read you Dan Snow's little distillation of that again as well, because it's easier to take on board. "If I was the Queen, I'd be sweating. Who do you summon to form a government when neither party leader controls the confidence of the Commons?" And I'm not a constitutional historian, or indeed a trained historian, just up to A-level. But it's not going to be permanent, but the point is you can have a general election, and at the end of that process, hopefully a leader who can command a majority will emerge, but it takes a while to get that up and running. And it's the intervening period, presumably, the interregnum, actually, almost literally, that would be the problem. Interregnum, of course, a Latin word, which my using in no way indicates that I am cleverer than people who don't know what it means. All it indicates is that my parents were concerned enough and just wealthy enough to send me to a posh school. Jacob. Chris is in Gloucester. Chris, back... No, hang on, we'll come to Chris next. Sorry, mate. Ben's first. He's been waiting longer. Ben's in Manchester. Cultural Marxism. What's going on, Ben?
Hi, James. You all right?
Oh, good.
Yeah, I think it's a funny thing to be phoning in for, but I think in regards to the conspiracy theory, maybe taking away the anti-Semitic part, I think I might be a cultural Marxist.
Go on, what do you mean?
Well, so I teach on a course at a university, and in an effort maybe to balance the scales, to counteract sort of decades of very Western-centric cultural study,
yes.
Myself and the other lecturers on the course, we try and teach a really broad curriculum of film and art from around the world, particularly from Africa, from Latin America and Asia, maybe in sometimes over and instead of Western culture, because we feel like it's really simply put, it's been done. I mean, it doesn't mean we totally disregard it, but we give an equal platform to culture from all around the world.
And that is problematical, is it, for some people?
Well, I think just in terms of how I read the cultural Marxist, very simply read the cultural Marxist conspiracy theory, not the actual
yes, of course.
definition, but the conspiracy theory, is this idea that there are left-leaning, metropolitan elite liberal academics and others that are pushing an agenda, an anti-Western agenda, through study, through universities. That and of course, yeah, that's a problem.
But how does different equate with opposition? How does just being conscious of other things mean that you are somehow denigrating the things we already knew?
Well, I think that it really quite sinisterly boils down in their eyes to the idea that Western culture is, in a really simple sense, better or more valid, and that's where you get into the white nationalist and the alt-right sense of the word. Why would we want to learn about...
But surely the best way to prove it, if that's what they believe to be true, would be to study all the other cultures even more assiduously and enthusiastically.
Yeah, well, that would be logical, wouldn't it?
Yes. I see what you did there. Here's the phrase. I'm very aware of that ongoing creep of cultural Marxism, which has come from Jeremy Corbyn, she says.
I don't think so.
So this is a genuine question. Stupid or sinister, Suella?
Sinister.
Oh, you would go for sinister? Oh, all right. Well, you know more about these things than I do. What with being an academical and all that. I mean, Ben, mate, come back a minute. We missed an option, didn't we?
Yeah.
What?
Oh, in terms of when she was stupid or sinister?
Yeah, we missed the third option.
Well, she can both.
Thank you very much. That's why they pay him the big money, to be a professor-type person in a big university. Chris is in Gloucester. Chris, what do you think?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm kind of cursing, really, that I'm the third one along, because I kind of agree with everything that these two people have said, and they've kind of stolen my thunder. But I think, I mean, this goes on to one of my favourite subjects to rant about, so I'm quite happy about this, is I think what a big part of it is a complete misunderstanding of what academia is. So when I say that, what I mean is, like, so there's this, I'm a graduate of history, and there's this kind of idea that there's like sort of a definitive history amongst people who don't study it at a higher level.
Yes.
So to try and put forward a different perspective on history is to try and rewrite history or to try and change it.
I'm just thinking of my own examples, and I'm afraid I'm going to rely upon the usual kind of inflated false controversies whipped up usually by tabloid journalists and television presenters. If, for example, they were trying to take down a statue of a man who'd made all his money trading in slavery because the world has moved on and they can stick the statue in a museum, but they're not going to have it in a university quadrangle anymore, then someone who doesn't understand or study history would describe that as cultural Marxism.
I mean, yeah, I think they would, but I think it's more than that.
Go on.
I mean, what you've got is so basically history as an academic area of study isn't as old as you'd think. And there used to be a big focus on what's called like the big man view of history. It's what Boris Johnson, he quite likes it. It's why he's a big fan of people like Winston Churchill.
The great man.
There sort of came like a point where a lot of academics were saying like, well, hang on, why aren't we looking at other aspects of history? Like you get academics like E.P. Thompson writing about the English working class and stuff like that. Like maybe it's not just the most powerful people. There's
a line in Amos, actually. I forget which book it is. It might be The Information, when he talks about how art, rather than history, began by telling stories about the gods. And after the gods, it was the kings and queens. After the kings and queens, it was the rich and famous. And finally, in the sort of middle of the last century, Western fiction began to tell stories about ordinary people, like, you know, the Silitos and the Saturday night, Sunday morning type stuff. And that is a similar view of history. History's not just about Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar. And the history of the British Empire isn't just about our dominance over the continent. It's about what we left behind and possibly even bad stuff that we did. And that's when they start getting cross at a non-binary perception of reality.
Exactly, yeah. The thing that I always say is that if you're studying history, beyond dates, places and names, pretty much everything else is sort of up to interpretation. So this idea about this...
But not in a binary universe where you pick a side and just start screaming abuse at the other side until the whistle blows. So this fits in with a lot of the stuff that we cover on the programme every day. It is an objection from people who don't understand things at nuance and thought and complication.
It's an anger against that, because it's the idea that, well, you're not saying the thing that I always thought that I knew to be true. So
Winston Churchill is messianic and never did anything remotely wrong ever. How dare you suggest otherwise?
And then it starts going into, well, this is what academics are trying to do, because as an academic, you need to find a new angle on something. You can't just be like, well, you know, Churchill was great and here's all this good stuff and I'm going to talk about all these big people. At some point you need to turn around and say, like, well, here's a new perspective.
And you might want to have a proper look at Amritsar and issues like that on his CV.
Yeah.
So, fine, you know what I'm going to do? I'm sorry to boil it down so simplistically, given that you've just reminded us of the importance of complexity. But when Suella Braverman said these things, remember, within Yeah, you know, with the memory of the terrorist attack in New Zealand still very fresh in our mind, and it was a phrase used by the perpetrator of that. It was a phrase used by Anders Behring Breivik, the white supremacist terrorist. She said, "I do believe we are in a battle against a cultural Marxism." Is Suella Braverman being stupid, sinister, or both?
I would definitely 100% say both.
Yeah, I would too.
I think she's using it because it's a buzzword that people...
And to be honest, if she wasn't fully aware of its ramifications and meanings, then that's sinister as well, because she must know where she heard it.
Well, the other thing I was going to say really quickly as well is there's also a kind of an even more kind of sillier aspect to it as well, because there's the academic aspect and there's also the media aspect as well. So a lot of really right-wing people have noticed that a lot of people in the arts and in the media are quite left-leaning. So the idea is, you know, why aren't there that many right-wing comedians?
Yes.
Well, it must be because there's cultural Marxists who are trying to push forward the left-wing agenda.
That's not very
and they're
funny.
Preventing all these right-wing voices from being heard. And it can't just be that, like, you know, a love of the arts.
So why isn't everybody like me, a bit thick and prejudiced, answer cultural Marxism?
Exactly.
Well, we got there in the end. Chris, you're a legend. Seriously, I'd give you a round of applause if it was Thursday. It's 12:46. A postcard, please. There was a deliberate mistake in this morning's programme, and I wonder if any of you spotted it. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, joined now by the political editor of this august radio station, Mr. Theo Usherwood, to talk us through the events of PMQs from about 45 minutes ago. We heard a lot of it, but, you know, this is a tradition, so fill your boots.
It's more than that, James.
Well, of course it is. It's an institution and a tradition.
I'll pick up from the best of the rest. Let's start with the leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford, in Westminster, of course, he's the leader, who asked the Prime Minister about her future and whether she might resign in order to get her deal through the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, it is becoming increasingly clear that the cost this Prime Minister will pay to force her disastrous deal through is the price of her departure. Yet again, another Tory Prime Minister is willing to ride off into the sunset and saddle us with a crisis in the UK and an extreme right-wing Brexiteer coming into Downing Street. Does the Prime Minister feel no sense of responsibility for what she is about to do?
The Prime Minister is due to address the 1922 Committee of Conservative backbenchers at 5 o'clock. It's expected that she will inform them of her decision to stand aside if her deal goes through the House of Commons. Asked on that question by Mr. Blackford whether that was true, whether she would stand aside, she didn't deny it.
Gentlemen, it's my sense of responsibility and duty that has meant I have kept working to ensure that we deliver on the result of the British people.
Ian Blackford!
Well, what do you think? Do you think she's going to do that?
She was relaxed today in the House of Commons. She seemed much more up for the fight, the battle with...
No, I mean, do you think she's going to tell them that she's off?
She may well name the circumstances around her departure. I don't think she'll name a date. I think that's seen by those in Downing Street as being something that there's not necessarily precedent to tell that to Conservative MPs behind closed doors.
So wait and see.
Well, she would do that. You do that to the cameras. If you're going to name the date of your departure, you do that to the cameras of the nation. And then but certainly, I think there is an expectation that she will name the circumstances for her departure. So far, there have been 13 convertees since Meaningful Vote, to promise of many more. If she can get on, if she promises to go. Next question picked out was from Sir Bill Cash. Lot of anger in the Conservative Party amongst members of the ERG, the European Research Group, about the decision to push through a statutory instrument tonight to extend Article 50 to April the 12th.
2 days ago, I asked the Prime Minister if, as absolutely required under the Ministerial Code and the Cabinet Manual, she sought the Attorney General's advice relating to her authorisation of the extension of the exit date, and would she publish this advice. She refused to answer. Distinguished lawyers and former judges are convinced that the so-called international agreement is unlawful. I sent her a letter about this yesterday.
Theresa May rebuffed the question.
It is a matter of international law that the date of the UK's exit has been changed. The purpose of the SI this evening is to reflect that change in domestic law. Should the SI not pass, there'd be severe uncertainty for citizens and businesses. There'd be contradictory provisions between EU rules and UK rules, but it would be clear that the date of our exit had changed. The House of Commons voted to seek an extension to Article 50. An agreement was reached with the European Union Council in relation to that. He's raised the question of commencement order with me previously. The commencement order is due to come into place on the date that we leave the European Union. Now, my honourable friend, I know, wants to leave the European Union, and we can, of course, leave the European Union if, I dare suggest to my honourable friend, he cares to back the deal that we can guarantee leaving.
In terms of news about the indicative votes this evening, James, Labour are going to back an amendment by Dame Margaret Beckett, the former Foreign Secretary. Of course, your listeners may know that as the Peter Carl amendment, the Carl Wilson amendment, which would where there'd be a second referendum on Theresa May's deal. Of course, that's good news for Remain supporters within the Labour Party, because Barry Gardiner said this morning, he's the Shadow International Trade Secretary, that Labour was not the party of Remain, so there's a tack back there. Conservative MPs, meanwhile, are looking at simply just not turning up to the indicative votes tonight, just not taking part in them, and therefore the thinking behind that would be that there wouldn't be a consensus for anything in the House of Commons, and it would render the indicative votes meaningless.
So they'd take back control by staying at home?
Yes, so they wouldn't take part, and therefore you get around. Well, you're giving that look. You're giving it.
I think it's funny, isn't it? What are we going to be taking back control by doing? What? Sitting at home, not voting in our parliament.
So they're not going. They wouldn't vote, and therefore you'd end up with numbers that simply wouldn't make any sense. And of course, it would get round the conundrum that Theresa May faces about how she would possibly whip those votes. It would offer the Prime Minister a get out. At the same time, for Oliver Letwin and Nick Bowles taking their attempts, making a mockery, I think, would be the thinking of their attempts to try and find a solution that Parliament would back.
And there's still no... I mean, I appreciate, if I've understood the Erskine-May precedent that John Bercow cited last week, you could, if you could get a majority in Parliament to overrule the Speaker's ruling, then you could have another vote on the withdrawal agreement. So if she thinks she's got a majority for the withdrawal agreement, she could get a majority for overruling the Speaker's ruling from last week. But there is still no there's no certainty whatsoever that we're going to be able to vote for a third time on the withdrawal agreement, given what the Speaker said last week.
The government's line on this, which came out yesterday, actually, I asked the question.
It might have changed.
No, it might have changed. But the government's line on this is because the European Council put into made legally binding the agreements for Meaningful Vote 2 at the European Council last week, then actually the deal that Prime Minister is offering is substantially different,
right,
in order to have it to qualify for a third Meaningful Vote.
And that would be in Bercow's discretion, would it?
Absolutely at John Bercow's discretion.
Bercow's got the power today, then?
Because
he chooses the amendments.
He chooses the amendments. We're going to get that decision.
I've always liked John Bercow, apart from that brief period in his youth when he was a member of the Monday Club.
So John Bercow picks the amendments at 3:30. They'll get whittled down from 16 down to about 4 or 5, and of course he will make the decision about whether there's a third meaningful vote. The thinking is that.
At what time will we have clarity? Sorry to interrupt you, but Sheila's looking itchy.
Clarity. Well, we need to know by 7 o'clock if there's going to be a meaningful vote tomorrow.
7 o'clock.
Otherwise, we need to know if it's going to take place on Friday. We need to know by 5 o'clock tomorrow.
5 o'clock. And if it's not going to take place at all,
it would take place next week. But of course, we'd have to go back to the European Council. Those are the 27 other EU leaders, and ask for a further extension, even though we don't have a deal in place.
I think I'm going to go for a massage.
No.
Yeah, seriously, just text me if it's huge. Yeah.
But this is.
I'll have my phone set so that only you and Mrs. O'Brien can contact me while I'm on the massage table.
But James, this is.
Hang on.
This is parliamentary.
Take on board what a privilege I've just afforded to you, Theo.
Yeah, come on, Theo. I was hoping I'd be on the list at least.
I won't be taking Sheila Fogarty's calls.
I'll only text something like shanty.
So, right, well done. Theo, no doubt, will be back on air, probably with Sheila, if not imminently. But here's what's going to happen. I've decided.
Go on.
We're going to end up with a Brexit that the key Brexiters, like Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg, have described on the record as being worse than being in the European Union.
Yes, that's it. But they've switched now, James.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, they're now on side.
But they still think it's worse than being in the European Union.
But they're going to vote for it because otherwise the alternative would be stay in the European Union.
The thing that's better than the thing that they're voting for. That's it.
Yeah.
That's all we got. Well done, everyone. Briefly, if you want to celebrate the madness that's unfolding or you want to drown your sorrows in a large bottle of champagne, there is one currently available on eBay, signed by myself, James O'Brien, and Susanna Reid, a proper celebrity. And it is currently standing at £245. It's a Fortnum & Mason Brut Rosé champagne, so if you know someone who absolutely loves Susanna Reid and can just about tolerate me, then pile in. £245's a bargain. There's also a drawer full of truffles.